The average running training plan will help improve your running performance by about 7%. However, the average running plan also makes a ton of mistakes, either leaving important stuff out or including too much that nobody actually needs. That's why I'm going to make it easy for you by sharing the proven training blueprint for runners over the age of 50 that easily doubles on that 7%. In fact, this blueprint regularly helps our athletes improve by over 20%, really because of how simple it is and how well it plays on good old human physiology. So let's see what works so well, starting with the overall 12-week structure. Since this is the backbone of the plan, this structure does most of the heavy lifting. Guess what? If the structure of the plan isn't well balanced, it actually doesn't matter what you do in the individual weeks. You're either going to get to race day underprepared, overtrained, tired, potentially sick, or even potentially injured. I refer to the overall 12-week structure of our Faster Beyond 50 plans. However, those 12-week structures are broken down into 3 4-week blocks. But first, before I get into that, let's talk about what the training plan is actually for. A training plan is really there to help you take the thinking out of the process. It's a guideline so that you know what to do in each of those training sessions when you are working towards a specific goal. That goal might be just getting fit, running your first 5K, or working towards a PB in a marathon, for example. Once we've got the plan to help with the guidance, it then comes down to how that plan is broken down. I've mentioned that our 12-week structure has 3 4-week cycles in it. Each of those blocks has then got a different component of fitness that we are trying to work on. In our first week or our first 4-week block, for example, we might be focusing a little bit more on running strength. So improving our ability and our strength to run well. The second block is focused a little bit more on improving our stamina or our speed endurance. And then the third of those cycles is where we then start to focus a little bit more on top end speed, especially once we start getting closer to race day. Then you want to be targeting a little bit more speed work, so shorter, sharper interval intensity type of sessions. Each of those blocks, however, in that cycle allows for proper progression. You don't want to be starting a 12-week cycle on speed work and then trying to work the strength on the slower type of movements or slower type of sessions later in the plan. There is a progression to it that is then structured working towards that common goal. Now that we know why the overall structure is important, before I dive into the individual weeks and why these plans work so well, I need to share a huge mistake I very often see runners over the age of 50 making. That mistake is not training for where you are now, but rather training for where you want to be. Runners over the age of 50 very often think, I used to run a sub 4-hour marathon, I want to run a sub 4-hour marathon again, and they pick a program for that sub 4-hour marathon. However, they might not quite be at that level currently. They might not have run for several years. They might only be at a level where they're probably pushing for a 4:30 or even a 5-hour marathon. And by doing that, what you're doing is you're doing too much too soon. The paces might be high, you're not going to recover well, and as a result, you're putting yourself at much higher risk of getting injured or getting sick. It's really important for you to focus on where you are currently, match the program with your current ability, and build hopefully towards that sub 4-hour marathon, for example. Now that you know that choosing the wrong plan could be a potential danger as to why this plan might not work for you, let's delve into what happens on a weekly level. Keep in mind though that our plans do vary slightly, so depending on the level of the plan, some programs might have interval sessions, some might not. That's also dependent on your level and why it is important to make sure that you are choosing the right plan. But on average, a typical week in these plans will have at least one interval session or intensity type of session. That interval session will be determined by which of those cycles you're in. It will have one long run in the week, 1 or 2 easy or recovery runs in the week. There will be at least 3 non-running days, one of which will be an absolutely full rest day, a day that we don't want you doing anything at all. You'll see in that weekly structure, and obviously week in, week out, how they build on top of each other. But in that weekly structure, with only having one intensity session, we typically refer to, you may have heard, the 80-20 principle. So 80% or at least 80% of your weekly volume should be made up of easy runs and your long runs. That's where we're really focusing on that aerobic capacity, improving your running efficiency, improving your recovery time so that you can get to the next training session feeling fresh and ready to rock and roll. The one training session or interval session that then makes up that 10 to 20% of your weekly volume is where we can then push the intensity really high, because of the bulk of easy runs we've done in that week allow you to make sure that intensity is on the opposite end of the spectrum. That's often what we refer to by polarized training. So the easy training being really easy and the higher intensity being really high intensity training. A common question we get asked in our forum on the platform is, hey coach, I'm so used to running a lot more in the week. How do you expect me to run this much less? And how is that going to help my training? It's actually quite simple. Remember, we're talking as an older runner or runners over the age of 50, we're really trying to drive home the point of recovery and making sure we are fresh enough for each of our training sessions. In order to run less, allows you to just recover better between those training sessions, means we're taking a bit of that eccentric loading off the body. And another way of doing that, especially if you are constantly tired or feeling a little bit tender and sore, is actually dropping a run and adding in a little bit of cross training, be it swimming or cycling, that allows you to do a little bit more. So for example, if you had an hour's run scheduled, you can do a 90-minute to even 2-hour cycle without it having as much eccentric load or as much demand on the muscles and joints in your body. Again, allowing you to get to that next training session ready to go with as much intensity that you need to put in based on the demand of the actual session. Let's now look at why this plan works so well for the over 50s runner. It's because of 2 things. The first thing, as much as individual recovery days are important in this plan, and because recovery is crucial for the runner over the age of 50, we add in recovery top-ups or recovery weeks into our training plans roughly every 4 weeks. It's important to note that this is a recovery week, not a rest week. So what we're doing there is we are just changing the focus slightly of the individual sessions and also cutting back on the running volume slightly. Keep in mind that adaptation happens best during recovery. So all the build-up we've done in the 3 weeks leading up to that recovery week, the recovery week allows us to regenerate, get that adaptation done, ready to kick us into the next 3-week cycle. Now you may have noticed up until now, I've neglected to mention the black blocks in that training plan. Those blocks are the second reason this plan works so well for runners over the age of 50. Before I show you what they are and how they work, it's important to understand why so many runners over the age of 50 are running in pain or running with nagging injuries. From the age of 30, we naturally start losing muscle mass, and that loss becomes more exponential over the age of 50. This unfortunately is inevitable, and with age, the degeneration process does begin. However, by adding strength training into the program, you can slow down and in most cases actually reverse the rate of muscle loss. There are 2 main factors as to why strength training is important. The first one is injury prevention. Strength training helps us fortify our muscles, joints, ligaments, and tendons to allow us to handle the amount of training load and forces we are putting on our body, especially as the training load gradually increases if you're building towards longer distances, for example. So the stronger our muscles are, the better our resistance to fatigue is. That's not only in your running and training, but also in everyday activities. The second component to the strength training as to why it's important is your running performance or improved running performance. That again can be slightly broken down into two different factors. The first one is better force production. We can be stronger. It means we've got a more solid base to produce force into the ground and in a forward linear motion. And the second one is our running efficiency. The running efficiency, imagine for a second, you've got weak glutes and weak quads. That affects this dipping in your hips, for example. So a slight buckling of the chain as you are trying to run in a forward motion. If we can get you a lot stronger, so stronger glutes, stronger quads, means that alignment is naturally happening. So you actually can use less energy. You don't have to focus on trying to align yourself first before running in a forward motion. There's less energy to propel yourself forward, making you that much more efficient. So injury risk and improved running performance is absolutely critical as to why we focus on the strength training component. Now, the strength training in our program, how does it fit in and what sort of sessions do we do? You'll see typically we might have it structured here on a Monday, being a slightly lighter training session, focused a little bit more on injury prevention type of work. That might include some resistance band work or core training work, really focusing on the basics and getting that injury prevention work in place. Later in the week, we'll up the intensity a little bit, slightly call it a medium intensity session where we focus a little bit more on resistance training, maybe some heavier weights, maybe some higher sets and reps. And then our third session in the week that we like to introduce is a high intensity session. It is, however, important to note that you don't want to be diving into doing high intensity work that might include some plyometrics and jumps because there is a higher risk of it. So don't jump straight into high intensity sessions if you have never done strength training before. Make sure you are laying a good foundation with that light injury prevention session, maybe the heavier medium intensity session, and only once you've done those two sessions consistently for a good 8 to 10 weeks, can you then start to incorporate a higher risk and a higher intensity training session into your strength program. You'll also see the session labeled Foot Core. We've adapted a program that really focuses on the intrinsic muscles in your foot. Those are the tiny little muscles that help support the structure around the ankle, the foot, as well as up into the lower limb. Very often we'll see people struggling with things like plantar fasciitis, Achilles problems, maybe even calf issues, and more often than not, as we're running and if your footwear is not correct or our feet are weak, we struggle and we fatigue quite easily in our feet that then can lead to those little nagging pains further up the structure of our lower leg. Some of you may have noticed in the background that I'm saying 3 strength sessions. I've spoken about 4 running days. Plus I've also said I want at least 1 full rest day in. And you're going, Dev, you can't count. There's only 7 days in a week. I understand that. And that's why I say the rest day has to be a priority. Those 2 strength sessions, so maybe your Monday, Wednesday strength session can fall as its own day session. There will, however, if you are throwing in a 3rd strength session in your week, there will be a day that you might have to double up. An easy run preferably with a strength session. In the ideal world, you want to try and split those sessions. So 1 in the morning, 1 in the afternoon to give a little bit more recovery between the 2 sessions. However, if you are pressed for time and you need to do the sessions back to back, that is also okay. There really isn't any priority in terms of which session happens first. You can do a run session before a strength session or vice versa, strength and then the run session, as long as you're getting both sessions in. Like I did mention though, if you are struggled for time and you are worried about load, I would rather you drop that run session on the double up day and just do the strength session as the priority. We're often asked about how much strength is enough. Here at Coach Parry, we have a mantra that 3 is ideal, 2 is better than 1, and 1 is better than none. So with all that said, the truth is even the best running training plan is only one weapon in your running arsenal. There's actually much more to the story if you want to get stronger and faster. Lindsay's here to show you the ropes and share with you his complete Faster Beyond 50 training framework. Click here to save your seat in the masterclass, where he'll show you everything you need and what's possible.